G'day guys. Today I have a special extra guest. His name is Chris Menegay. How are you, Chris?
I'm well, you?
Not too bad. So Chris, I usually just see at tech heads around the world. Today he's in Sydney and he's graciously offered to talk to us, and I'm going to ask him plenty of questions about Visual Studio and TFS and things like that. So Chris, tell us a bit about yourself.
So my background is I used to own a software process consulting firm. We worked with Microsoft, went into customers, helped them implement TFS, implement Visual Studio, really around the process pieces. So how could you actually use the tools to develop software better? And that was our focus. I sold that business and then still was interested in the space. So I joined Microsoft, and now I actually represent Microsoft on the kind of the tool sales side of things. So customers interested in acquiring those tools, I work with partners to make sure that they can acquire the tools and then successfully implement them.
Right, okay. And we've been on the TFS Insiders list for a long time. Are you still on that now, even though you're at Microsoft?
I am still on that.
Okay, cool. All right, so your new job at Microsoft, is that pretty similar to what your old job was?
It's very similar in that the end goal is the same, right? Helping customers actually acquire the tools and the techniques, the processes, to help their teams be more successful when they're building software. So whereas before I was a partner working with Microsoft and we did services, right? We went in and helped the customers be successful with the software. Now I'm on the software side of that, so I go explain the software to the customers, work with the customers then acquire the software, and then they generally still need some partner help to really get the maximum value out of it.
Right, okay. All right, so before you really cared about
services.
Yeah, the services.
And now it's about product.
Need the licenses. Now you care about the licenses.
And they still need the services. Yeah, it works really well together.
All right, cool. So I'm going to start off by talking to you now about Visual Studio Ultimate.
Okay.
So there's definitely some easy choices. Most devs have no problems paying for Visual Studio Professional, maybe Visual Studio Premium, and then there's the Ultimate, and that's really expensive.
And it is Ultimate though.
It is Ultimate, but we're talking several $1,000s here for that one. Is it worth it? And has your answer changed since moving over to Microsoft?
So my thinking on it has kind of evolved a little bit. Right. So if you think about it from a services perspective, the lesser the tools that you have, honestly, in many cases, the more services you're able to provide. All right. Where Visual Studio Ultimate, it really has kind of three aspects to it. One is it has the architect tools, right? All the modeling tools are shoved into Ultimate so that if you are an architect, you want to use the modeling tools, well, it's a no-brainer. You go ahead and get Ultimate. Then all the load testing tools are in Ultimate. So if you wanted to go out and actually load test your application, you have unlimited load testing. You could simulate 1,000 concurrent users on your website. Yep. Those are in Ultimate. But those are kind of niche things, right? You have a few architects, maybe you have a couple people writing load tests. The real key feature there that's for all Visual Studio developers is something called Intellitrace. And Teletrace is what we like to call historical debugging. Yep. Right? What it allows you to do is its purpose in life is to actually help a developer be more productive in their day-to-day job as they're writing code, trying to debug code, make it good quality. And Teletrace is meant to allow them to do that faster. Right? So asking of is it worth it? The way I look at it is you hire developers in the States. They're about $100,000 a year on average, right? And that's including their phone, their computer, their desk, the space. You have to cool them with air conditioning. I live in Texas, so we have to keep them cool.
And you have to pay for health insurance over there.
Health insurance. So there's a lot to it. But when you hire somebody, and you're going to spend that kind of money. You're hoping to get more value out of them than $100,000, right? Why would you hire somebody for if they were lesser value than $100,000? So let's say you're hiring a developer, thinking you're getting $150,000 in value out of that.
Okay.
Well, what our goal is really to make that developer more productive. So instead of $150,000 in value, you're getting $160,000, $165,000. All right. Okay. So if you can say that Visual Studio Ultimate and primarily the Intellitrace features increase his productivity or her productivity by 10%.
Oh yeah.
Right, that's $15,000 a year of extra value you're getting out of each and every developer on your team. And what's you said a couple $1,000s, right, for the price of Visual Studio Ultimate. So you're actually, I guess, saving money or making money, depending how you want to look at it, by acquiring the tool set.
Ah, right. So your logic is if the cost of Visual Studio Ultimate costs less than $15K, you're in front.
Yeah, it's no different than you could basically have a laptop or everything you do on your computer you could do in pen and paper. Right, but you're saving money by acquiring laptops for your team rather than anybody running around with an abacus.
Right, okay. Well, you could give devs 386s and save a bit of money.
You absolutely could. Exactly. You can get 386 processor machines, right? Why ever get them a new computer? Because that costs money too.
All right.
You're trying to make your team more productive, get more value out of it.
Okay, so I'll try that technique on my next customer.
If you sit and think about it, right? But the real trick there is not the math works great. The trick is what percentage productivity are you really going to get, and that's what you've got to get something that's believable.
You never really know, but
you got to take a stab. I mean, realistically, the break-even point's like 2%.
Really? Oh,
yeah. I mean,
well, we know it makes them more than 2%.
That's my point, right? We know it's more than 2% productivity boost out of getting it, so it really is. Yeah, it's more money, but it's worth it.
Okay. All right. Let's just assume that they do go for it, so we can now have the conversation, including these great tools. I'm going to ask you about Intellitrace. Tell me. Well, when I think of Intellitrace, I think, well, devs don't use it daily. They use it sometimes when they've got a bug that happens on, a test server they can't repro. Like a lot of testers just give feedback back without that. So are you proposing that they use Intellitrace each day or once a month, or what are you saying?
They should use it as part of the regular dev process, right? If anytime a developer thinks they're going to be debugging, Intellitrace should be on. Now, if you've ever written code, you don't know when you're going to be debugging, right? You write some code, you hit run, you start running the application, you see something odd. And so what do? You stop the application, you put in some breakpoints, hope you got them at the right spot, run it again, they're not the right spot, you keep going back and forth. So Intellitrace is meant to be that when you see that oddity, you hit stop, drop it into the debugger, and you can rewind your execution tree because it's keeping this little log behind the scenes.
That's true.
So you can turn it on right in Visual Studio, go to Tools Options, and go configure Intellitrace. All right, so anytime you're doing debugging, you should just be on.
But you do know that it's slow, so devs turn it off.
Well, it depends on how you have it configured. Now, for a demo, back when I used to demo this stuff all the time in my services business, I would turn on full logging. Worked great for a demo. It's horrible for real application work because it will literally log every single thing that occurs in your application. Makes for a super compelling demo because you can track everything. You can go find out, 3 minutes ago when you clicked on the save button, what was in memory at the time. Well, that's great, but the log files get massive. For a real application, for demo apps, it was fine. But so what you want to do is understanding of your application, figure out where the key spots are, and in the configuration, so you go to Tools Options, you go configure it, you can tell it what events are important. So maybe button clicks are important to you. Maybe you do a lot of ADO.NET, and when you do an ADO.NET call, you want to go create logs there. So you need to be very selective and turn on only the events you need and turn off the events you don't need so that it's optimized.
All right. You know what I'd love? I'd love Intellitrace to look at my code and tell me which events I should have on or off, because that takes a bit of work to work that out.
Oh, well, a lot of that is we really assume that we have good quality developers out there using our tool. No, that's actually a great piece of feedback to understand that. Now, obviously, you'd want to probably go through and tweak it after the fact, right? You may go, hey, you have a lot of ADO.NET, so let's do that. And you may go, but you may realize, well, we have a framework for that. We don't maintain that code, so we don't need to debug it, right? So it can't just look at it, but you're right. That'd be a great way to have it do suggestions, because you don't want to have a bunch of button clicks on there if you don't have code in the button clicks. Right? Obviously, it wouldn't suggest it if you had no buttons, but if there were something. So that's a great piece of feedback. You know the proper channels to actually get that back to the product group. So I'll leave that to you to
use the voice. Okay. All right.
There you go.
So, are you happy with Intellitrace? Is there any features you want in it to make it better for you?
The biggest thing I want is guidance. So, but prior to the 2012 release, what I really wanted was support for Intellitrace in production. Right? And the idea behind that is we have anomalous things that happen in production environments, and they're really hard to repro. Right, and they're just crazy hard to repro. I have a lot of customers that I worked with in the past that they just were frustrated with that. And so now with 2012, we support getting those Intellitrace logs out of a production environment, loading it up, and you're in full debug mode inside Visual Studio, debugging what was in memory at the time the developer, or sorry, not the developer, but the code was running in your production environment. Right? But that's there now in Visual Studio 2012. It's very, very slick. So now what I really want is guidance. And guidance is more along the lines of how to configure it so it performs well. Because what you're saying is true. The easiest, coolest thing to do is go flip on all the logging, but then it performs so poorly, you got to go turn it off. People just turn it off, right, the entire thing. And what they really need to do is get guidance, right? So if you're doing an MVC app or whatever it is you're doing, right, maybe you're writing for Windows Phone 8, maybe these are the events you should try and have on and optimize for that.
So I'm not sure, Chris, but I think there's something coming by the TFS ranges.
I've heard the same thing. So that should add quite a bit of value there. I mean, it would be interesting to see in the future where you could literally tune Intellitrace by app type, even, right? There's lots of ideas there, but right now there's enough capability there that I'm hesitant to ask for too much, because as more and more people start using it, what people ask for is going to change, right? What you and I ask for right now may be different than when there's a whole lot more people using Intellitrace. They're going to have better feedback, right? The massive customers. We just need more people using that and getting that thing configured.
Well, if
properly.
you want more people using Intellitrace, put it into professional. All right.
Well, we have a very large team producing these tools, and
All right. So Test Manager. Tell me about Test Manager.
Okay, so Test Manager is our testing tools, so it allows you to actually plan all of your testing. Right, so you go in and define what kind of platforms you want to test for, Windows 7, Windows XP, Windows 8, Windows Phone 8, iPhone, Android, whatever that is. And then you go in and you start writing your scripted test cases, manual test cases, right? It also has the capability to hook in automated testing as well. But it's really about getting your testing organized as opposed to just saying, hey, we went and tested stuff. We can go and say, yeah, we tested on Windows 7 with these test cases, and these are the results that we got. Oh, and by the way, that was when we tested the build from yesterday.
Ah, right, okay. But just starting off, are you saying that every bug reported should be through Test Manager?
Not every bug, but if your QA team is reporting a bug, yes. Right? I as a customer using somebody's software, I'm not expected to use Test Manager, but if I'm on the QA team, I should be testing with Test Manager, either because I'm running a manually scripted test case, an automated test case, or perhaps I'm doing exploratory testing. But if I do that through the tools, I get the collection. I can collect Intellitrace, I can do video capture, and I can create a record to turn an exploratory test case into a manual test case automatically.
Oh, right. So you're saying that, are you saying start with exploratory testing first?
No.
Right.
And yes.
Do you want,
can I have both answers?
So I'm just trying to establish here, do you want customers, when they create their user stories, do you want them to create test cases and test steps?
Yeah, yes. So my ideal world is once you know what the request is, the requirement, the user story, the use case, whatever you want to call it, right? Yep. Once you know what that is, it forks. The development team can go off and start doing design and development. The test team can go off and start doing test planning, right? So for a particular requirement, they may need to test with Windows 7, 32-bit, 64-bit, and maybe some mobile devices. That needs to be understood by them. Before a line of code is even ever written, they can think about that. They can write the steps. Let's say it's a login screen. I can write the test steps for a login screen without ever having a piece of code, right? I could do a customer order entry form, right? If it's documented in the user story, I could create a test case out of that. Then when the developers create a build, and I have that, I'm actually testing my test cases created off the requirement against that build, and I'm validating, did the development team create what I thought they were supposed to create, right? There could be a discrepancy between what the developer thought and the tester thought, but that's our point to actually validate that.
Right, okay. Wow, that was a lot to take in, especially with the speed you talk.
I was going slow for the sake of the Australians in the room.
All right, so as an example, as a customer, like a user story here, as a customer, I want to search for a customer so that I can find Adam. Is it good enough to do that and just ask for some exploratory testing done?
Absolutely not.
Right. So you want the tester to... Why? Because the tester can just test that works.
Well, so let's say you do that search and I do that search. When you go do that search, you type in Adam into the search field, you hit the enter key, and it brings up some results. Correct. And you say, pass, worked fine. I go in there, I type in Adam, I hit the search button, and nothing happens. Or shit, the application blows up. Same test case, both exploratory testing, two different people do the app differently, and you get a different result. So is there a bug or is there not a bug? Well, if you do the test, there's no bug. If I do the test, there is a bug. The bug was always there, but an exploratory test doesn't mean you'll always find it. And also, even worse, is how do we reproduce that test case? Right? Because you did it with an enter key, the developer tries it out, they go in and they hit the I did it with the button, report a bug, developer does it your way, hits the enter key, and they say, could not repro. Right? Now we're in that loop again.
So are you saying, start off with the user story, then do your exploratory test, and then have that convert into an automated test?
This is my yes and no part, right? So in a perfect world, they'd go ahead and just write scripted test cases, right? If you're going to go search and just hit the enter key, well, you know that. Type it up first. This is what I intend to do, and then go do those steps, right? And then you can have another test case and say, well, what if I want to hit the button instead? And you could have another test case that says hit the button. Right?
Chris, I think the difference here is you're probably assuming that it's it's a company with a disciplined process. A lot of companies are they're not even using Test Manager right now, and they're taking their first steps in to using Test Manager.
And that's the yes or no part, right? If you don't have the discipline to go in there and create the tests initially, or you don't have the foresight to really think through what's the application going to look like until I get code, right?
Okay.
Then you can go ahead and say, okay, a lot of times you'll see this with business analysts, right? You've got your business people. They're going to do some of the testing because they know how the app should work, right? They gave you the requirements, and they're going to do exploratory testing. But when they do that exploratory testing, you then want to convert those into test cases that you or I could then run. We may not know the app at all, but given appropriate test steps, you and I could do the testing.
Right.
But we need somebody that knows the business domain in order to facilitate that.
Right. Okay. Cool. So let's talk about the next one, which would be I want to ask you about Lab Manager.
Okay. I love Lab Manager.
Would you agree that you don't see too many customers using Lab Manager even though they own TFS?
I would agree with that.
And what are they missing out on?
They're missing out on lots of good stuff. So the key thing that we see customers adopt Lab Manager for is for test environment rollback. All right, so the idea is this. I go out, I spend the next 3 hours testing, and I essentially dirty the environment, right? Most of this is around data. So I go out and I delete Adam from the database, right? We'd all like to go delete Adam Cogan. So we delete Adam, and you're no longer there. But then if I want to run the test case again, I try to delete Adam, Adam's not there, right? So I need to reset the database. And this is true across all testing, which is why you see a lot of exploratory testing, because you want the tester to think on their fly, oh, Adam's not there, let's go delete Chris instead, right? So the rollback is very, very key, and the idea is the tester can initiate that. Right. So as a tester, I can go through and say reset the environment, and boom. I don't have to talk to IT, I don't have to reload any databases, I just say reset the environment back. The other part of this is it truly does put the dev and QA team as accountable for their QA environments. Right? So they turn them on, they turn them off, they reset them, they archive them off for future purposes. So if they want to test with Windows 7 today but Windows 8 tomorrow, they can actually maintain those environments, archive those things off, reconstitute them later and do testing on them.
Okay. So would you say that you would be using Lab Manager in a manually and automated?
Both, right? So the data integrity is really the key for doing automation. Right, you and I can think on our feet and say, well, Adam's not there, let's go ahead and delete Chris. An automated test case, if Adam's not there, it just crashes and fails your test. Right, so being able to have predictable data in a predictable environment, right? If you don't have let's say it's a browser app. Your browser and my browser, probably they're both IE, they probably look vastly different. Right, you may have toolbars configured differently, you may have the permissions set up differently. It's not a predictable test environment. Lab management gives you a predictable test environment, both for the automation, but also for the manual testing. Right? If I were to sit down and do manual testing on your machine, it is going to be a different experience than using my machine. By having a common lab management environment, we would actually have a Windows 7 client we would both log into. It'd be identical for both of us, and we would be testing identically.
Okay. So are you happy with Lab Manager? Is there anything you'd like to see Microsoft do to make it better?
The biggest challenge we have with customers using Lab Manager is generally to get the most value out of it, you have to have a lot of other stuff in place, right? And there's nothing that's not necessarily fixable, right?
And be very friendly with your sysadmins.
Yeah, because what generally is infrastructure-wise is you're going to go buy some new Hyper-V servers, right? And you're going to have those Hyper-V servers be dedicated for hosting lab management VMs. Right? That's going to be the case there. Because what you're trying to get to is a nightly build process that compiles your code, resets your QA environment, pushes all the bits out to the QA environment, and then runs all your automated tests. You come in the morning, look at it. If everything passed, you've just done a full regression with a known test environment, all your tests automated. Right? That's what everybody really, really wants. Now, you ever going to get to 100% automation? Probably not. But if you got to 80%, life is much, much better, and your code quality shoots way up. So that's one aspect, but that assumes you have automated builds. That assumes you have automated test cases. That assumes you understand your data for test purposes. Right? Most people aren't there. So the value people are getting out of lab management before they get there is just strictly for manual testing. Right? That's the key thing. The big impediments that we see is getting the infrastructure teams inside companies to go get the servers, allow the dev teams to manage those VMs on those servers, and also the fact that in some cases it's Hyper-V. Right, so a lot of people have VMware, and you can use VMware behind the scenes, but you lose that rollback capability unless you want to go through the VMware interface to do the rollback. Right. Okay. But you can use VMware. You can actually use VMs in the cloud, so you can have a VM in Azure, or if you want to go crazy, put one out in Amazon. But you treat it as kind of a machine that you just connect to, as opposed to one that you actually are controlling. So.
But what do you think we'll see in TFS Azure or TFS Preview?
Well, TFS Preview is still out there today, or TFS.
No, I think
I'm not sure what it's going to be called when it's finally there.
I've got a suggestion.
Yeah, let's hear your suggestion.
How about as a name? So we have GitHub. What about TFS Hub?
You know where to go give your suggestions, and I think the team knows what to do with your suggestions.
That's right.
So I think we're all good there. But yeah, I hope to see. I mean, lab management has such a compelling story to it. I'm hoping to see further and further adoption by customers and further support on our side. But that's a very fluid capability, because as it stands right now, a lot of customers aren't using it, right?
That's right.
I mean, we really want to get that adoption up, and a lot of it's still just the messaging. Getting a couple of Hyper-V servers is more politically challenging in a lot of organizations than it is technically challenging, right? When we did this as consulting, we could go set up a lab manager in a day, right? A couple days later, you'd have VMs replicating your environments. It's really not that hard if you know what you're doing.
Yep.
But it's navigating the corporate infrastructure to do that, right? I've seen companies where it takes a month or two to get a server, right? So those challenges exist there. We got to overcome those challenges, and I think that's what's going to guide us to where the product ends up being, right? It's going to come from user feedback, and honestly, right now we're not. I don't think at Microsoft we're getting enough user feedback on it, because we don't have enough people out there really running down the road with it.
All right. So before I let you go, the last question I'm going to talk to you about is I'm going to circle back and ask you a few questions about bugs. When you work with a team, do you think it's really important to have a bug definition? What is a bug and what is a feature, or you don't worry too much?
I've heard both. I actually, consulting, when I first started doing this back in like 2005, I had a customer that they had bug-free systems. And the reason for that is they actually deleted the concept of a bug out of TFS. Got rid of it. Because it created friction between their business analysts who said, that's a bug, the developers did it wrong, and the developer said, no, that's the way you wrote the requirement, so I did it exactly as you told me to. So they just got rid of bugs, because at the end of the day, you knew we were going to do the work, right? But the key thing about a bug is really, I believe it should be unique, and that bugs are reported against builds, right?
Ah, okay.
Right, so a requirement or a user story is not an issue, right? We're not raising an issue with a requirement user. We're raising an issue with the capability of that requirement in an existing build.
And the reason you do that is because you're talking about having a build go every single night.
Every night, every day, whatever it might be, right? Yeah. If you're filing a bug, it's very, very important to me, what were you testing, right? You could be testing last week's build, and I found and fixed that problem yesterday. Right, so your bug report is not irrelevant to me, but I can go ahead and mark it as fixed, because I know that the build you were testing, yes, it did exist in that build. And the other example I like to give is, let's say you have 1,000 test cases, right? You run them all, they all pass wonderfully well, and everybody's like, wow, that's great. And then you push out to production, but the build you tested was not the build you were going to production with. So all your testing was pointless, and what we pushed out to production was completely untested code, right? It sounds like nonsense, but because in the back of our mind, we know we are intending to test the build we're going to production with. Well, let's go ahead and manage that, right? When we file bugs, let's have the build out there. When we actually run a test case, let's note, I ran this test case against that build, and it either passed or failed, as opposed to the build from yesterday.
Right.
Right, so builds and bugs and test cases all go together.
Okay, so it's not good enough just to report a bug by itself. It's not good enough just to report a bug against the PBI, the user story. You want to report it against a build and a test case.
Yeah, by default, it's going to be associated in TFS to a test case, and test cases are linked to user stories. You could also link it in TFS to a user story, right? But you're reporting a bug for that build, and the bug really is, at its fundamentally relationship, is tied back to the user story or the PBI or the requirements, right? Because we have a problem with that requirement in that build, but in a different build, it may not be a bug, right? It may be fine in that one. So you want that data. You want to have a test case there so the developer can attempt to repro it.
Yep.
Right? They can go through the same steps. So that's where you have an exploratory test. You want to be sure you're capturing the logs that come with Microsoft Test Manager. You're doing the video capture. You're doing the action capture. You're doing the system log capture, all that kind of good stuff. So the developer has a shot at actually reproducing the problem, and after fixing it, validating, should this pass next time.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you, Chris, for all this.
Thanks for having me.
What are you doing for the rest of your time in Sydney?
I'm kicking around your house, going to go enjoy the beach, do a nice walk, and head home tomorrow.
Okay. So straight home to Dallas?
Straight home to Dallas. Got a direct flight. 15 and a half hours.
Is it thanks to Qantas?
Thanks to Qantas.
Great. Well, you enjoy it. Thank you very much for all this.
Thank you.
Cheers. And that's Adam Cogan signing off.